everybody, good morning. This is Jean here. I'm just working on a simple project that I've started. Today is Tuesday, September 11th. Terrible, terrible day to remember. I've just started a small throw quilt because I'm still healing. I'm taking it easy. Don't worry about me. I'm taking it easy. And I have done a tutorial on my quilt, which will probably be maybe about 45 minutes long, of how I've constructed this. It's very, very simple, and I wanted to show you how simple it is, but what a complicated looking quilt you'll get. But I did say at the very end of my tutorial, which I'm going to put up later, I have the quilt show coming up. I'll put up the whole thing later. I just wanted to show you a sort of a bonus footage of how I do mitered corners. I'm making this sort of a southwestern looking quilt, and it has a stripe for lack of better. It has a striped fabric. Yeah, I've cut this yardage. This striped fabric here, which has a beautiful, like a southwestern design. I've used that on the outside border of my quilt, and so you could even what I'm saying is striped fabric. Don't be frightened of if you want to frame a quilt, because you're like, oh, how do I miter the corners to make that lovely picture frame looking corner, which I have just done. So I've just done it. I've just showed you. I just showed you how I do it. And I haven't actually looked up any tutorials on how to do it. This is how I do it, and it's not scientific at all. There's no math. There's no figuring. There's just sort of like, you fold it and you iron it and you're real careful, and it turns out really good. Turns out really good. So I show you how I do it. That's just a few minute video of me showing you how to miter a striped fabric for the corner of your whatever quilt if you're using to frame your quilt. So that's my little video for today. I will be showing you the full tutorial and probably finish this quilt up next week or whenever. And I'll show you the whole thing, how I made this quilt. It's real pretty, if it's your thing. Thursday, today's Tuesday, Thursday, Jen and I are going to the quilt show in Oaks, Pennsylvania. Hope to see some of you there. Again, tall Jen, short Jean. I don't know what I'm going to wear. Why? Who cares what I'm wearing? But if you're looking, I probably will wear black, because if we have photographs taken, it's more slimming. I don't like black though. I wear black leggings all the time because they're so comfortable. But I do like to wear more colorful tops. I do like to wear more colorful tops. But they say black is slimming, and I put on a ton of weight, so I should wear all black from head to toe. But I don't. Anyway, so if you're there, look us up, and we'll have a picture taken, and we'll mention you. It's so much fun. So okay, so here's my tutorial on how to miter a corner using striped fabric. There you go. Thanks, folks. See ya. Bye. In a previous video of me making this quilt top, I was saying I'm going to be mitering my corners, and I didn't do a tutorial on that video because that went on too long. But I'm just going to do a short, maybe you know me, a short video of how I miter the corners when I'm using either striped fabric, which this technically could be classified as. Okay, I've already done two corners of this quilt here that I'm using. It's sort of like a southwest look. Now what I have had this fabric here, and where's the rest of it? I don't know where the rest of it is. But what I did is oh, here it is. Here it is. This was my yardage of this fabric. When I buy striped fabric, which I would deem this is a stripe. It's a very decorative stripe, but nevertheless, it's a stripe anyway. I love buying these striped fabrics because there are so many ways you can make them. You can just have this bit, you could have that bit, or you could just have a small bit. You could have a wide bit. And I usually buy lengths of 3 yards because I feel 3 yards will go up and around on all four sides of a fairly decent sized quilt. Now, because you obviously have to cut the length of the fabric. So with this stripe, with this fabric for my quilt here, I have cut out 4 lengths of fabric. I always, as you know, if you've been following me, I always err on the side of caution, and I get more fabric. I use more fabric. So I have cut this fabric into this stripe here. Now, I was to put around the outside of my quilt. I'm framing my quilt. I'm finishing this quilt up. And this is the fabric I'm using. This is going to be the outside. And I'm going to be stitching. I want that blue line to be, as I'll show you, on my quilt. So there's about 1/4 of an inch. So I've already done the top. I've already done the one side. And I've made a nice mitered corner. Now this is how I'm going to show you how I've done this. I've sewn, let me see if this is in the frame. Yeah, I have sewn already, as you can see, obviously. I've sewn this border on here. And again, there is my blue line. There's my 1/4 inch right there. To wherever. To wherever. So I have this design. Now, when I make a mitered edge, a mitered corner, what I need to do is I make this piece, the border, the width of the border going up plus a little bit. Now, let me just tell you right now, there are tons and tons of ways to measure and do this like scientifically. I'm not doing it scientifically. I'm doing it like gene-tifically. This is how I do my mitered corners, and I'll show you. So now I have on both sides. There's that side, and this side. I have my both. This is just a throw size quilt. I have my both edges proud of the top. So now I want to. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this bottom up here because I want to show you how I've sort of not random. I've done it well. I found the middle of my quilt, which is this seam here, and I've lined it up with a white block there. Okay, so just that your eye sort of sees it. Now sometimes when you're doing this, the edges won't turn out perfectly and you can't match the design perfectly. You're doing a miter, you're doing a frame. But for the most part, what I'm going to be doing is, I will be keeping this piece here, again, a little bit longer. Let me see if I can see it. Yes, a little bit longer, just to err on the cautious side, than my border. I'm going to find the middle of my quilt top, which is here. This seam right here is the middle of my top. I'm going to straighten everything out. And I'm going to find, keeping that away long enough, I'm going to find one of the images that is white that I was showing you on the bottom. So there, this white piece here, because this is a decorative border, if you have a stripe, you don't have to worry about all this. This right here is going right down to that center seam. So that's where I begin. That's where I will begin. This is the top of my quilt. This is the seam that I want to sew along here. So I'm just going to flip this over and I'm going to match that seam up there, match that design up, and then I'll pin, and I'm going to stitch this border on 1/4 of an inch, or for me, it's going to be right under that blue line there, because I want the blue line to show. If you can see, if you can see on what I've done, I've had this decorative blue line showing on here. So I'm going to continue pinning. Now what I am going to do is I straighten everything out, and I will pin. Just and I always pin, you always sew. I've said this before. You always sew your borders onto the top of your fabric. Always, always, always. That way you don't get wavy borders. Your borders in your sashing, you always sew onto the top. Now, there's a seam right there. I'm going to stitch right up to the seam. Right up to that seam. Sort of pushing that seam that way, towards the outside. So I will stitch right to that seam, making sure I have all of that left over. And I'll do the exact same thing on this side. I have plenty. So for now, what I'm going to do is I can tell I got plenty here. I'm just going to cut it. Again, I err on the cautious side. I always do more. So I straighten all this out. And no, that's a little bit, that's fine. That's a little bit a bigger seam there, but that's fine. This is all nice and pinned, and I'm going to be stitching right to that point where that border meets my outside border. I'm going to stop right there. That's important, that you stop right there at that seam there. So I'm going to go stitch that, and I'll meet you over at my ironing board. I will show you how I'm going to stitch this seam to show you in depth how I do this mitered corner. Now hopefully you can see that I've pinned right up to that seam to match that, to go right up into that seam. I'm going to put my needle, I'm sewing on my Husqvarna. I can feel it. I'm going to put my needle right there and start. Now I have pinned this. I'm going to just back stitch it just a little. I'm going to stitch right along this blue line for me. Yeah, I went over my pin. I shouldn't do that. I'm just going to stitch right along this blue line, which is about 1/4 of an inch. I just want to, you'll see my blue line showing. I don't usually use pins, as you know, but it's fairly important in this application that I use pins. I've matched up the bottom of my quilt, stitching on the top of, as it were, my outside border. That way you don't get waves or anything like that. Again, I'm right in front of my machine. It's a little bit difficult with the camera, but you always stitch right in front, right in front. I can't express how important that is. Again, straighten everything out really nice. Oops, there's some straggles. Now I'm coming up to this point here, to the corner where I want to go right into that seam right there. So it's right to there. It's fairly important. Oh, my machine. Oh, I think I ran out of thread. Did I run out of thread? Isn't that funny? Oh, something's happening to my machine. I'll be right back. Yeah, it was my bobbin that messed up. So I've finished this seam. Now I just want to show you how important it is for you to stitch right to that seam. Now you see that? Hopefully you can see that. I have stitched this border on, and it goes right to that, right into that seam right there. Not a stitch less, not a stitch more, because it will make a bit of a difference. Now I'm going to go over to my ironing board and I'll show you what's next. I'm at my ironing board, and I just want to show you how very important, if you've been following along with me, I have some water here, just how very important it is to set your seam. I've stitched along the top there. I just used some water. You can use some sizing or some starch. Very, very, very important that you set this seam really well. You know me about ironing and pressing. This is ironing, which I do a lot. And just keep everything nice. Now I'm not worried about that end yet. I'm going to worry about this end here. I'm not ironing the whole thing. So there, you can see, I'm trying to keep this in the frame. Do it over this way. You can see my pretty border. And you saw I wanted to keep that stripe nice and keep that blue. So that's what I've done. So I've pressed that seam. Now I'm going to press it upward, because that's where pretty much it wants to go. I cannot emphasize the importance of ironing and pressing in quilting. I just cannot emphasize it enough. So now we have a lovely top border, right? Now comes the part where oh, mitering, it's not hard, but this is how I do it. Now, I think there's a science to this. I don't know what it is, math or whatever, but this is how I do it. Now, since I've made this bit longer and that bit longer, we're assured that we have enough. So literally what I do, because I'm a visual person, I just bring this edge of my fabric here. I bring that so it's over here. It's going absolutely vertical. It's matching up. Might have to hold this point here. Just matching up there. It's over there. And look what happens. Sort of tuck that under. Tuck this under here. Make it nice and flat. You've ironed it all. Look what happens. Can you see that? Look at that design. This one might not, right here, may be a little bit funky, but I'm not bothered at all by that. That's what it is. I can't be messing about with that. I'm not a perfectionist. But what I want, see here, is the frame. You see that? From this corner here, from this border here, this is my design, and look at my frame. It's worked out beautifully. I'm looking at this stripe and this stripe here, this point here, and this point here. Now, I have enough. I'm not worried about that. What I'm going to do is that's exactly how I want it to look, right? When I do it. So what I do, just put to see the red here, and the blue is pretty perfect. I just hold the iron on it. I just press that. I just flatten that and crease it the dickens out of it. I just iron it and iron it. I don't have a steam iron, as you know. I use a dry iron. I just put water. If I do use anything, I put water in my spray bottle. But this I want to just flatten and crease. That's the whole point. And everything is lovely and square and straight, right? Everything is nice. Nothing is skewed. So there, I have flattened that with an inch of its life. Okay? And there is my corner. Well, now you're going to say, well, how in the world do you sew it? This is what I do. I have to cool it down because it's really hot. What I do is very carefully, without shifting anything, and you can do it, it's really hot, is I just hold that, I lift this up so gently. I don't do this side, lift it up so gently. I'm not shifting this at all. I'm holding this, I'm holding that. I've not shifted a thing. Not a thing. Now look at that beautiful creased line. Right? I've not pulled it, I've not shifted it. Beautiful creased line. There. Now I'm going to come in, lift it ever so gently, pin it maybe half an inch away. Get my hands out of the way here. All the way to the end. Okay, now I'm going to take it over to my machine, and hopefully you can see this. Yeah, I'm going to find this. Let me just. I will shift it up here because I have to take it to my machine. I'm going to find this point in here. I'm going to find that where that stitch meets that seam. Remember, we have a seam coming up and a seam going away. That little stitch is right in there. I'm going to sort of push this wherever the seam wants to go, the bottom one or the top one, push it aside and find that one little stitch where it's ended. And that will meet up with your line. And then you're just going to stitch along that line. I'll take you over to my machine and hopefully it'll work out. Probably not. Hopefully it'll work out. So I'm going to go over to my machine and stitch this. Now I've brought this over to my machine. Hopefully this will work. And you can see I've put my needle. I've found, pushing the little creases aside, sometimes you get a little tuck there, and it's a tiny little tuck, but I've sort of tried to push the fabric away and find that intersection of of those two seams where that stitch is. I think it's pretty much there. Now I put my needle down and I can see my creased seam there where I'm going to sew. I am going to sew right on that seam. I'll put my presser foot down, make sure I'm not catching anything. And I'm coming out of that corner and I'm stitching carefully right on that creased line, because if you remember, the creased line is where our design pattern matches up. So hopefully that's why, if you can see, my pins are not in the way, but they are holding it right off. And now I'm going to take my pins out. I'm not trimming anything yet. I would just want to open this up in front of me and see what I have. And look what I have. Can you see that? Hopefully you can see that. There's a little tiny tuck, but that will press out to my right there. Because I was literally maybe one thread, but I'm fine. That will just press right out, lovely and flat. And look, can you see my miter? Can you see my miter here? It's coming up, and there's my stripe there. There's my stripe there. My blue. So I'm looking at this stripe here, and I'm thrilled with that. I'm thrilled with that. There's no science, there's no math. I don't know. This is how I do it. Now, I do want to make sure, now I can trim it. I want to make sure everything is out of the way underneath, that I'm not cutting anything, and I'm just going to trim. I don't do it a 1/4 inch. I do whatever. Just I slice this off. My hand's underneath, smoothing. I don't want to cut my beautiful border here. I'm taking real care, and then I don't go right into that corner. I just leave it like that. I just don't want to mess with that intersection there. And then I'll take that over to my ironing board, and I'll trim this up here. This one here, just nice and square. And there, folks, is my beautiful mitered framed corner of a stripe. So this, like, if you have stripes, it's just the exact same way. You have stripes going up. You just want to make sure this little corner here is perfect and that your stripes match up. And then just carefully take it over as you have ironed it, because that's the finished iron product is their finished sewn project. How well you've ironed it is how well you can stitch it out. Then press it. Let me just come over here and let me just see. I'll come over here and I'll put this up a bit. There's my corner. Again, I keep everything lovely and flat. Now, I will just press where it wants to go. And that seems like that seam is going that way. I'll just press that where it wants to go. I've already pressed the dickens out of it. It's flat. It matches. And I've made a lovely frame for the outside of my quilt. So that, folks, is how I do my mitered seams, my mitered frame on a corner using a stripe or decorative fabric. So I hope you learned something. Hope this was fairly useful. Don't be afraid of stripes. Make a beautiful frame. Beautiful. Thanks, folks.